Sega over the years has released a number of well-known peripherals, but today I want to talk about one that isn't mentioned all that often, and that is the Sega Saturn Shuttle mouse. And welcome to Goldfish on Games. The Sega Saturn Shuttle mouse HSS0102 was released in Japan by Sega in 1994. It sold for around about 3,000 yen, which would have made it around about $30 or £20 at the time, or roughly double that in 2024 money. Although this one had been marked down a few times before it sold. Inside the box we get a Saturn branded mouse mat that has been folded to fit the box, which has given it a highly defined curve after all these years, but it is of the design that I prefer, as in it's rubber backed with fabric on the top. There is a manual. Well, really it's just a leaflet that's all in Japanese, but if you know how to use a mouse then you will not have any difficulties with this one at all. And finally, the mouse itself, still in its original bag, as this was pretty much new old stock and has never been used. It's coloured to match the Japanese Saturns of the time, this nice grey. But there was a later one that matched the white Saturns. This compares favourably with the other mice that you might have been using in 1994, as it's got 4 buttons, that was more than most of the other ones at the time, and more than some machines have these days, and these all map to the controller. With the smaller coloured button up here being start, then you've got the primary 3 buttons, A, B and C. It has a nice rounded shape and actually feels pretty decent in the hand. It also moves around well, and there's a decent click in the buttons. But then I would have hoped so, being effectively a new mouse. Now when it was brought over to the US, it got a different design, and was sold as the Netlink mouse. And despite being mentioned and planned, neither of those variations ever made it to Europe. It came with a reasonable 180cm or 6 foot length cable, and just uses the regular Saturn controller connector. Flipping it over, we find that it is a ball mouse, which shouldn't be all that surprising considering when it was released. And with a quick push of the door we can get the ball out, and we find rollers that are free of people gravy. I do like a new mouse. Now this wasn't designed for any specific game. It was just another option for developers to use. So it wasn't bundled with any titles, or at least this version wasn't. And considering that the Shuttle was a mostly Japanese only device, it got far more support from developers than you might expect, as there are reportedly over 100 games that will work with it. So with the power of my Japanese Saturn and the Saroo, we can spend the rest of this episode checking out a number of those games, so we can see how well it works. And we start with point and click adventures, as they are an obvious choice, as so many of them came from the PC, where it was the main way that they were played, or at least they were by 1994. This is Discworld, a classic if brain-melting adventure game that annoyingly only got mouse support in its Japanese release. And there's no options for subtitles or even changing the language. So this one is going to be even more confusing than it normally is. Now interestingly, they made use of the extra buttons when stacked up against the PC version, as it now has a dedicated move, look and interact button, where on PC, move and interact were single and double left click operations, so they have spread things out. Even if in the menu it still has an option to tweak and test that double click speed. But other than that, this plays exactly as you'd expect with a mouse, to the point that you could be mistaken for playing the PC version, as they do look very close to each other. Atlantis: The Lost Tales was a European-only release that got mouse support, which is quite surprising really. And just as the previous game, this was a mouse-driven title on PC, and ends up playing very much like the original. This is a sort of 3D adventure that started to become more popular after Myst. A game that also hit the Saturn and also had mouse support. But rather than show off a popular, well-known game, I went with this instead. If mostly because it's a game that I've been planning on playing on PC for ages, and haven't properly got around to it yet. Now, one thing to notice is how you interact with the NPCs and the inventory.
Where's the Queen's consort? His Highness is in the palace. Is this the way to the companions' quarters? Go up the steps.
As unlike the PC version, you don't get a cursor when doing this. Instead, you have to push to highlight and then press a button to select. This is the same as in the menus, and it can take a little bit to get used to.
Go up the steps and take the first door on the left.
The Saroo itself also seems to have some limited support for the Saturn mouse, but similar to Atlantis, you don't get a cursor. You have to push to change selection, and it's not quite as responsive as I would have liked. Sometimes it will just zip through the menus, other times it's just not wanting to move at all. I really would have preferred it if they had left and right click going up and down the menu, and then they could have left the middle click to select. One interesting title that had support for the mouse was Doom. Yes, one of the ports that everyone likes to rag on had mouse support. But it acts a bit like the basic mouse controls in the DOS version. So you have to keep pushing forwards to move, while also at the same time trying to move left and right by moving the mouse. I was never a big fan of that control method, and usually switched it to moving forward and back with the keyboard and left and right with the mouse. But obviously, we don't have a keyboard, and it doesn't support you using a controller and a mouse at the same time. What you can do is hold down the right mouse button, and that sort of lets you strafe, and then you can shoot with the middle and open doors with the left button. But what I couldn't work out how to do was change weapons. I tried different combinations of using controller in the other port, but nothing worked. Though I'm not sure what I should have expected from a game whose sound effects don't seem to work correctly if you leave it on the default stereo option. But then this was a port that has a lot of history, and that was even sabotaged. So it's amazing they even found time to add in even this basic support. It's a shame that none of the other FPS games on the Saturn had support for the mouse, as using it in combination with a controller or an arcade stick would have been great. But then you will already be compounding an issue that we already have with the mouse, and that is the need for a table or a flat surface near enough to the console and the TV so you can actually use it, as having that setup can be a little bit fiddly. But that's not going to stop us checking out more titles, as one genre that had support for the mouse that was quite big was light gun games. As quick off the shot is Virtua Cop. If you plug in the mouse, you will get a cursor on screen. But once you get into the game proper, it still has that annoying push to select thing going on in the menus. But if we go into the options, we actually get this nice image of the mouse, and it really only gives us options of what button does what. I was hoping for a little bit more, as while the shooting is fine, as it's a simple left click, reloading is a double right click. I guess they thought a single click would have been too easy, as you could have just tapped both buttons at the same time to shoot and reload, and I won't lie to you, this takes some getting used to, as who has done a lot of double right clicking in their life? Part of me was tempted to switch the buttons around, but I think trying to shoot with the right mouse button might have also broken my muscle memory as well, so there was no perfect solution here. but overall this is well done, and it's also similar to how the PC version works. But I did find that the mouse didn't seem to move as quickly as I liked. I'm not sure if they've slowed it down, so it doesn't become a complete and utter crushing advantage, which quite a few people find when they use a mouse with a light gun game, but I'm sure the last time I played this I was a lot faster with the Saturn stunner gun. And then we get games like Chaos Control, that weirdly got 2 releases in Japan. As it came out there, then it was updated when it got released in Europe, and then they brought it back with those changes for the Japanese re-release. And one of those changes was to add stunner support. Why that wasn't in from the start, who knows. But all versions had mouse support. Which seems a weird way round to do a rail shooter, but then Chaos Control is a bit of a weird game. Because it's of that style that it's basically just playing a video. And then when you shoot down an enemy, they just draw this smoke sprite over the top of it. And sometimes it doesn't even cover the whole thing up. But I did find that the cursor moved better than in Virtua Cop, even if the game itself isn't as good. One area that the mouse did well was puzzle games, and the Saturn got quite a few of them, including 3D Lemmings. Okay, it's not a classic puzzle game, and possibly the worst in what is a great series, but if you play the Japanese version, then you will get full mouse support, to the extent that you'll even get these little mouse icons in the menu, which shows you which button you need to press. Like many of the other games, this feels like they took the existing PC mouse controls and then just moved them over. And if it wasn't for the main menu being different, and that it doesn't look quite as good as the PC version, you might have been tricked into thinking this was the PC version. But with the mouse, you can move around the map using the context arrows that will show up when you move the cursor around the screen, and with how close you are to the edges of the screen determining how fast you move. And that's done with the right mouse button, with left obviously being interacting with the Lemmings, as well as the menu down the side. But you can also switch between the default camera locations with the middle mouse button. So with that, you can more or less play the whole game with the Shuttle. That is, if you wanted to play the whole game. One of my all-time favourite franchises, believe it or not, is Picross. So when I found Logic Puzzle Rainbow Town, I knew I had to play it as it's a nonogram game. Once you work your way through the menus and get yourself into one of the puzzles, you'll have to try and solve it using the numbers that are along the sides of the grid, which tells you how much of those lines have squares that need to be filled. Now you'll fill a square by using the left mouse button, and you can use the right mouse button to put down a cross where you know there won't be anything at all. And between those two main tools, you should be able to solve the puzzle and get an image. But that's just the start of this version, as later puzzles will give you multiple colours. So you'll also have to work out where the different colours have to go. Now this is one place I feel the game is slightly let down by the mouse, as you have to go over and click on the different coloured crayons to change them. I think it would have been better if they allowed you to cycle with the middle mouse button, but they thought it would be more useful to lay down the temporary square icon, which I have to admit isn't something I use all that often in the other versions. It's possible there might have been a way to change this in the menus, but I had to use Google Translate on my phone a lot just to get this far into the game, as it is heavily text based. but this is a perfect use of the mouse. And somewhere else that is also perfect for the mouse is simulation games. And while it's a shame that the Saturn version of Transport Tycoon didn't support it, we do get some RTS games that do. But not CNC unfortunately. But we do get the 90s European only game by the Bitmap brothers, Z. This is a comedy RTS game that has you playing as robots fighting over various planets.
Get out of here.
And with the mouse connected, this game just acts like the PC original. Even the main menu has a cursor. Now this game itself is a bit of an oddity to me, not only due to the fact that this is a quite hard PC game that got ported to the consoles, but they also include support for an add-on that had been announced but then shelved for at least 2 years by this point. I can only assume they must have got a Shuttle mouse in the office and decided to add support to make playing the game easier, as you really do want every advantage that you can get with this game. And that is due to the capture style gameplay, as you have to send out your robots to grab the flags in the various territories. These will then in turn give you buildings that you can make new robots or vehicles, or radars so you can see what's going on. And if you're not quick enough, then it is extremely easy to get overrun, as they can then just outproduce you.
Unit reporting.
If you can get over the difficulty, then it is a fun game, and while the Saturn version does look great, I would have to say play the PC version instead.
Under attack. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Robot manufacturer.
You got it. Vehicle capture. Vehicle capture. Yes, sir. Vehicle capture. Okay.
Vehicle manufacturer.
Vehicle capture. Oh my god!
And with that, we're at the end of the episode. I was hoping to show off a few more Saturn only titles that made use of the mouse, as there are still quite a lot of them. But they were typically graphic adventures, strategy or simulation games that required a decent understanding of Japanese to explain, which I don't have. But I feel that this was a good cross-sample of what you might have expected had you gotten the mouse. And for those with the skills, you would find many more deep and interesting titles to investigate. And overall, the mouse works really well, and is basically as good as any other ball mouse that I've used. And those extra buttons were nicely placed, and the shape of the whole thing was well thought out. For a peripheral that Sega just threw out there and didn't give much internal support, this had legs, or at least it got on a roll with the amount of games that it got, and it's possibly the most well-supported peripheral that Sega ever released. And while that thought bounces around my head, I've been the Goldfish, that was a shuttle that took off, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider the whole liking and subscribing thing, as YouTube keeps telling me that I need to push it. Or if you'd like to check out more stuff first, then I've covered a few Sega peripherals and add-ons in my time. And if YouTube is doing its job, then there should be 2 videos on the screen right now that you could go and check out.